Hi, everyone. Today we have Gianna Driver joining us, who is currently the Chief Human Resources Officer at Exabeam, a leading cybersecurity company. Gianna has a wealth of experience that she'll be able to discuss with us today, a 15-year tenure and exceptional track record across a variety of companies in leadership of human resources and people. And while we'll be having a sort of broad-ranging conversation, the primary focus will be on a topic that a lot of people are curious about right now, which is how to get employee development off the ground inside of your companies. So welcome, Gianna, and thanks very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Serena. I'm super excited to be here and looking forward to our chat today.
Perfect. So just to get started, Gianna, tell us a little bit about your background and what drew you to human resources in the first place.
Yeah, well, so I've been in the people space for it's actually probably closer to 20 years than 15, working in a variety of organizations, typically tech companies and global in nature, sometimes public, sometimes private, sometimes CEO owned, and the interest in human resources wasn't necessarily an intentional one, I have to say. It was more of when I started my career, I realized that I naturally gravitated toward emotions and incentives and the people related aspect of business, while also wanting to honor the profitability, ROI, more business side of things. And the place in an organization that houses all of that really marries those two sides together is this function we call human resources. And I love it. I think often to myself, if I could do anything in the world, what is it that I would do? And I would do exactly what I'm doing. I truly love this field of human resources and people operations.
Wonderful. And that is a great pitch for the human resources and people realm, that beautiful combination of empathy and caring about people with the analytic side that allows for that to map back to business success.
Totally.
At what point in your career, I know that, human resources and people leadership spans multiple different functions inside of a company and responsibilities. At what point would you say that employee development became part of your focus?
Mm-hmm. So early in my career, when I realized that this thing called HR was my jam and it was my passion, the focus at the time was a lot on recruitment and building and getting people into the organization. But what you often find is relatively speaking, shortly after someone joins the organization, we as leaders in companies need to have articulated ways of helping those employees become truly successful and thrive at our place. So it was very soon after getting people to the organization at the time that we had to scramble and figure out, oh, okay, well, now that they're here, oh goodness, we've got to develop them. What a wonderful problem. Okay, let's figure out how to do that. So it was very, very early on.
Perfect. And have you noticed, did that sort of pattern exist across all the different companies that you've been in HR and people leadership for, or do you notice that at certain types of companies or certain stages of life for that company?
So I think that employee development is housed typically in the HR people function, and what I would say is in both private companies, public companies, large and small organizations, what I typically see is employee development starts to become an area of employees' focus after about a year and a half of tenure, generally speaking. Now, obviously, there are outliers on either side of that, but usually what you find is, the first few months that someone joins a new company, they're ramping, they're onboarding, they're trying to understand their role and expectations. But then as they progress forward, and especially as they start to hit that 1 year anniversary and into the 2 year mark, they start to then say, okay, I feel like I've mastered the competencies of my specific role. What next? How can I be ready for the next thing? So, generally speaking, I find that it's been somewhere around typically the 1.5 year mark, but it's usually between years 1 and 2 that employees start to become very hungry for development. The one caveat that I would add is what we're seeing now in the workplace is as more Gen Zers enter, they are asking about development opportunities a little bit earlier. So what's interesting is in that demographic in the workplace, it's more around the 6 to 9 month mark that we're starting to see lots of questions about employee development.
Perfect. And something really good to keep in mind as companies are beginning to introduce more and more Gen Z workers into the ranks of their organizations.
Mhm.
So you start, work at a company in terms of setting the hiring plan and making sure that you're able to hire and attract really, really awesome talent. And then about a year in, or potentially earlier on for Gen Z, they're coming to you or they're coming to the organization and saying, what's next? And it's time to put in place programming or support around their development. Um, what has been your experience by and large with introducing employee development programming into organizations in terms of receptivity and general starting points for
Mhm.
getting that going?
Yeah, so I'll answer really in 2 parts, and I'll focus on the first part. So when you go from having nothing to getting something off the ground, that I would say is the hardest in the process. The
Yeah.
second piece of this is when you have something really scaling that and making it, broader ranging and more impactful is a second set of wonderful opportunities. But to really focus us on that first part, which is going from not having a ton to really, getting something started. So how do we do that? So I've done that in a number of organizations. And what I've found is it's very, very important to understand the business needs and then tie learning back into an ROI bottom line impact. Because I think you'll find in almost every organization, leaders would say, yes, learning is important. I don't think that you're going to find many leaders who say, no, development and learning isn't important. But where the rubber hits the road is when we start talking about funding, dollars, and time. So, what's helpful is to understand, okay, in our business, where are sources of pain? Is that employee attrition? Is that employee engagement? Is that, I mean, there are any number of different areas that you could focus on. So understanding the problem you're trying to solve, so that focus area, then quantifying the cost of that pain, then saying, okay, some solutions here are learning, as an example, investing in employee development and growth. And I've found when you can tie a dollar figure into making the case for getting something off the ground, leaders are a lot more receptive to giving it a try. To emphasize, though, going from nothing to something is success. Managing expectations, I wouldn't anticipate going from having, nothing really formalized to having a robust, ginormous learning development, function. I think typically it's, okay, well, let's pilot something. I've found that CEOs and CFOs are a lot more amenable to chunking it up. So starting with a very finite project or investment, and then seeing how that goes, then saying, okay, now we can scale this further.
Perfect. I mean, I think that that's really useful. It's a really useful perspective because at times it can feel, and certainly a lot of the individuals that I speak with, it can feel a little bit like boiling the ocean because they're aware of so many opportunities for development.
Mhm.
And also data points coming from various areas of the organization around the desire and the appetite for employee development. That the idea of jumping from we're thinking about this to we're doing it all and we're doing it all really well can seem intimidating, and the path to get there is not always clear. So it
Mhm.
sounds like you're saying putting in place a um, a common objective with stakeholders around the ROI that you're seeking, the business benefits that you're seeking, and then scoping a pilot are two incremental steps in order to achieving that grand vision of really awesome professional development that everybody is talking about.
Mhm.
Um, in oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So 100% agree, Serena, with what you're saying. To be very tangible and specific
Yeah.
about something, during the Great Resignation, so back when, not too far back, when many organizations were going through just really high turnover and attrition numbers, it was a source of pain for many of us. So if we use that as an example, okay, attrition is X percent or this many people. Let's dive into why that's happening.
Mm.
So looking at the exit survey data, like that type of stuff, and then distilling in the organization I was at the time, we deduced and realized, wow, the number one reason for regrettable attrition is lack of investment in career growth and career pathing. And so from that, then we were able to say, okay, the average cost per hire is this much. And remember, our attrition, historically was this much. So if we take that number times the average cost to hire, plus also quantify the time that others take when we do make a new hire to
Mm.
onboard and ramp them and have them be fully productive, is a significant cost. And so if we're able to look at that total bucket of cost, and let's say it's $1 million or $2 million or whatever it is, if we're able to take a small fraction of what we're going to be paying anyway in cost and say, all right, let's put those dollars toward some employee enrichment, employee development programming, even if there's just a 2% impact in reducing that attrition and turnover,
Yeah.
already, more than made this an investment that's worthwhile. So that's an example of where, making that business case has been really helpful in getting something off the ground.
That's perfect. And I think that practical steps towards getting there is something that people are really hungry for. So I guess it sounds like one data source for identifying needs and being able to start building the financial case, or at least the business case for professional development, is from exit surveys. Are there any other sources that people should keep in mind, or that you have found to be particularly useful for building, the case?
Yeah, so exit surveys and attrition data is super helpful. Keep in mind that that is in hindsight, that's looking in the rearview mirror, right? I like to say that ENPS, Employee Net Promoter Score,
Mm.
that's useful because that's a temperature gauge for current employees. So that can often be predictive in nature because we can then say, okay, we're starting to see a dip in our overall NPS, or maybe in this department, it's going really, really well. And by the way, ENPS is something that's super helpful as you roll out employee development programs to start to gauge the engagement and overall sentiment of those who've gone through development programs versus those who've not. My experience is I've seen an uptick and a sustainable uptick in engagement and overall ENPS when people do go through these types of programs. So that's another data point post fact that you can use to look at the effectiveness and further investment in development programs. Those are my biggest nuggets. There are other metrics and things around DEI, et cetera, that you can look at too, but those would be the two biggest.
Perfect. And perhaps the attrition data and exit surveys are, and it sounds like ENPS are the richest sources. Let's imagine there's an organization that is not experiencing high turnover or unexpected turnover. People are comfortable with that piece, but there are, there's high sentiment for wanting to address professional development that is being pulled from Net Promoter Scores or elsewhere. What are sort of any ideas for how you might frame that case for business impact?
Yeah. So this is an organization that doesn't have a turnover problem, and sentiment is clear that employees want investment. How do we solve that problem and go about getting a development program off the ground? What I would do is I'd look at the data and say, what departments in the organization have the highest sentiment for wanting this employee development program, like learning or L&D. Then I'd go to those leaders, those executives who oversee those functions. I'd share the data with them and then propose a solution of taking a bucket of funds and a bucket of time to pilot an enrichment employee development program. And I have to say that having executive sponsorship and buy-in into this is really, really important, because let's say that the HR leader is successful in getting some funds and dollars for an enrichment program or development program. If there's not executive support and buy-in, what will happen is folks who go through the program are not going to be in environments where their managers and leaders prioritize the time and investment and energy that it takes to truly take learning seriously. So that executive support is really, really critical.
That's a really good word of caution, and I think also an important piece for people to keep in mind as they are laying these plans and trying to build the case, which is, yeah, how do you make sure that there are sponsors at the outset, and also sponsors who stay connected to the employee development such that they're also impacting and reinforcing, it sounds like, that this work is happening. I think probably a lot of people are who want to do a really successful job at putting in place employee development, and they're ready to build this case, might want to know, what is sort of the time horizon for something like this? It sounds really amazing to be able to build this over time and actually reach buy-in for a pilot. What does that process actually look like? I mean, is it months of time? Is it weeks of time?
So as much as I would love to say that it was just days or weeks,
Sure.
the honest answer is that it's months, and it's plural months. So what I've experienced across multiple organizations is it typically takes multiple months to get executive buy-in and support. Because if you think about it, the data gathering component of this, then meeting with leaders and sort of talking them through what you're planning to do for this employee development program, socializing it with then not just that leader, but perhaps with other leaders inside their organization. So, all of this is time and cycles. Then once you have whatever it is that you want to do, and once there is executive buy-in and support, well, the actual doing of whatever that plan is, so executing it, takes time. So if we consider a few months to just do the executive sponsorship piece of it, then a few months to hire a person, whether that's internal or external, takes a little bit of time and vetting. Then after the person's identified and on board, well, then you have to actually create the program that the participants are going to go through. And then there's the duration of the program. In general, I find that to have data that's very strong, it usually is a minimum of about 3 months of time in the program before there's something really meaningful and substantive to look at. So in total, my experience has been that it's at minimum 6 months, but more often than not, closer to 9 months before there's real tangible information around, okay, this is something that is really viable. But then what I would say is after that, it's been my experience again across multiple organizations where there's almost like a waiting list of people who want to join these development programs. They could be high potential, high performer programs, L&D programs, et cetera. And I think from there, then it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, how do we find the time and resources to execute? And that's a really wonderful problem to have.
I was going to say that sounds like the dream problem to find yourself in, and a real testament to the success of putting in place an employee development program. So you're somebody who is taking ownership of building employee development. You've been tasked with it, or it's clear that you want to drive it forward, and so you're putting in place this plan. What would you suggest to people around an internal communications strategy or cadence? Anything that you're able to share to keep, once you've got buy-in for a pilot, people looped in and on board and excited about the program, in order to then increase its scope over time?
Yeah, one of the things that we've done here at Exabeam is we created the program. We hired the person internally who is leading this program. She's leading a bunch of other things too, but she is leading our employee development and L&D programs. And we created this high potential, high performer program. When we then identified the participants, all the execs were involved in this process of identifying those that we wanted to go through the inaugural pilot program. And then what we did is in the actual sessions that the participants go through, various execs and leaders are facilitators and involved in that way with the the folks going through the program. And what's happened is that involves them, B, it informs them because they're a part of it. And then afterward, we ask for their feedback. And then we actually do tweak and change and modify based on what they have to say. So that's kind of one way that the senior most leaders have been involved. Then what we also have been spending time and energy on is internally communicating this through various forms. It could be our company all hands meetings, our newsletters that go out to all of our employees every month, just informing them about various things that are going on. And we've positioned the program such that it really truly is an honor and something that people are very proud of when they are selected and they go through the program. So, we're continuing to evolve it and update and iterate it, but it's a ton of work, but we're finally to a place of seeing some of the fruits of our labors, and it's really, really fun.
That's wonderful to hear. And sounds like a really successful and thoughtful program that has been put in place. I guess, sort of as we get to the end here, one of the open question for you: any major sort of like bloopers of trying to put in place employee development over time, things that you would definitely caution people to avoid doing, where you swung and it didn't work out as well?
Yeah, I think there are a few misperceptions that we needed to correct early on. And one of those was this perception of, oh my gosh, we don't have time to have people go through these development programs. And when we really distilled the concern, it was that there was a concern if you're learning that you're not doing. And that's actually not true. Those who are in these programs, they are learning and they are doing. These are not mutually exclusive things. And I would even say the learning that's happening in the development program is enhancing and amplifying their effectiveness in what they're doing. And in our pilot program, we had one of our busiest groups, most in-demand groups, our sales engineers who went through this program. And to have them be champions and ambassadors, and to also talk to, we didn't segment our learning over here and then put all of our, functional responsibilities on pause. No, they integrated and did those together. That was a misconception that we wanted to get in front of sooner rather than later. So I would encourage leaders who are thinking about getting a program off the ground to make it clear to folks that learning and doing are not mutually exclusive.
Perfect. That sounds like, and are you saying that is a lesson for the learners themselves to correct that misperception, or that is a lesson for executive sponsors or other people who are concerned that their employees who are learning might be taken away from their functional responsibilities?
More the latter, right? Because that's where I think there was the most concern. Now, of course, there are times where I think learners have that fear, at the onset of the program, but addressing that early on in the first sessions was really helpful. But the misperception, I think, happened for us at the very beginning when we were trying to get leader and executive support.
Perfect. Well, Gianna, I've got one more question for you before I open the floor up for any final thoughts or insights, questions that you wish I'd asked that I hadn't asked that you'd like to talk about. So the question is, So let's imagine that you're listening to this and you are the chief people officer, you're the chief human resources officer at an organization that for a number of years now has said, this is the year that we invest, this is the year that we invest. And still they're sort of being met with a bit of resistance because there are a million different priorities and things feel like they're on fire. What would you say is the best pitch or a couple of key points for them to be able to deliver to make the case that we really should start investing in it this year?
The one piece of advice that I would say is turning around the notion that learning and employee development is a cost center, and instead having the narrative be around how investing in people and their growth and development is essential to profitability and business success.
Awesome. I am certainly a big believer in that. And I think the way you put that was really concise and really powerful and really spot on. Um, is there anything that you would like to add that we didn't cover? Any advice that you would offer to people who are really focused on making beautiful, successful, and great bottom line employee development investments in their organizations?
Well, I guess I would leave you and them with knowing that this is often when you're starting something from scratch, it is a lot of work, and it is often, as we've talked about, met with resistance and objections. Do know that A, it's worth it every step of the way. This is absolutely worth it. B, also know that you're not alone. Those of us who are in this community of engaged, thoughtful, proactive, innovative people leaders, we understand your pain. You're not alone. And this is a community. And so if there are questions you have, I mean, obviously, Serena, you and your org are fabulous resources. Folks like me and or others out there are resources. So we're all in this together, and we're all committed to investing in our employees, and that grows them as individuals, but it also helps all of us. So know that you're not alone, and there are folks out here like us who are happy to share ideas and thoughts and encourage along the way.
Well, Gianna, this has been a fabulous conversation, a really enriching conversation from somebody who has been there before and is motivated and obviously incredibly talented at pulling together great minds inside of an organization to get focused on what you described as being so essential for a company's success, which is their people. So thank you very much for your time today, and I really appreciate this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much.